We went back into the archives today to find this wonderful episode we did several years ago. This one's on Carolina Snowball. It's a boiled rice pudding. You're really going to love it.
We recently ran into a very interesting 18th century London cookbook from 1767 called Primitive Cookery. What makes this cookbook unique is that it's an 18th century vegetarian cookbook. Today we're going to be looking more at that, and I'm going to share with you a very simple but delicious recipe from it. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. Peruse any bookstore or visit any online bookseller and you will find hundreds of modern cookbooks written specifically for vegetarians. But if you go researching 18th century cookbooks, you'll find such books are very difficult to locate. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on vegetarianism, whether modern or 18th century. Modern vegetarianism takes on many different forms, and people practice it for various different reasons. Vegetarianism did exist in the 18th century, and a similar ideology to modern vegetarianism can be found in the Pythagorean diet, which is a vegetable-only diet that was promoted by Antonio Cocchi in Italy in 1743. Cocchi's dissertation was translated into English for the purpose of challenging 18th century convention. But for the most part, 18th century vegetarianism existed for different reasons. Weak or ill people were often prescribed very simple foods, often vegetarian. And during Lent, which is a Christian season right before Easter, many parishioners were restricted from eating meat. There are a number of period cookbooks that offer recipes for just such occasion, but they weren't recognized as being vegetarian. The cookbook Primitive Cookery addresses vegetarian recipes from a different standpoint. This book is a collection of recipes, probably borrowed from other sources, offering suggestions, healthy meal suggestions for those who couldn't afford meat. There's a certain irony to this little cookbook written for the poor. It's this 80-page booklet sold for 1 shilling, which is about the price of a common man's daily wage. A lot of money for a little cookbook. This book would conform by modern standards for the most part to an ovo-lacto diet in that it includes eggs and dairy products. We're going to be making 2 dishes today, both very simple, perfect for the laborer or the soldier alike. The first is going to be a Carolina Snowball. The Carolina in the Carolina Snowball refers specifically to South Carolina. Rice was introduced into South Carolina in the late 17th century, but the crop was a failure. It wasn't until the early 18th century rice became a very popular export and was exported mostly to Great Britain. This is a very simple recipe. I'm going to start off with 1 apple that I've already cored and quartered. We also need a pudding cloth. Any natural fiber cloth will do. And we need about 1/2 cup of rice. We've found that the medium grain sticky rice works best for this recipe. Our last ingredient is the zest of 1 lemon. We're going to put that in the core of our apple. Now let's place that in the rice. We'll tie this up snugly so that it holds its shape, but we still need to give it a little bit of room to grow. After we've tied this, we're going to manipulate it and get the rice to go all the way around the apple. Most of you will recognize this as a simple apple pudding, but this one's a little bit different. Normally, we would put our pudding into an already boiling water, and in this case, we're going to follow the directions and put this into cold water. Once this comes to a boil, it needs to boil for about 1.5 hours. Now let's get started on our second recipe. While we're waiting for this to come to a boil, we're going to prepare a very simple rice pudding. We're going to need equal parts, about 1/2 cup each, of rice and of either raisins or dried currants. In this case, again, the medium grain rice works better than a long grain. Make sure these are mixed well together. And that's really it. All we have to do is tie this up. For this recipe, we're going to make sure that the water's boiling before we drop this pudding in. Our simple rice pudding is going to have to boil about 2 hours. You need to be careful taking the cloth off of your pudding. You might want to try dipping this in cold water first and then very carefully removing that cloth so it doesn't pull this apart. The sauce I've made for this is a very simple sauce. It's just butter and sugar in equal portions. The apple and the rice go so well together. And that simple sauce, perfect for on top of this. This is really, really great. It's a simple Carolina Snowball. Let's go see how our plain rice pudding's doing. That's wonderful. A mix of flavors between the rice and the raisins and that very simple sauce really sets it off. I mean, could you get anything more simple than rice and raisins boiled in a pudding with a very simple sauce? It's so great. If you're interested in this recipe, make sure to check out the savoringthepast.net cooking blog where we'll have these recipes posted. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also see our website or request a print catalog. I want to thank you for joining us today as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century.